Welcome to Get the Facts, the program that provides you with information on government's policies and initiatives. I'm your host, Enthros Campbell. Today we'll be talking about human trafficking, and our resource person is manager of the Trafficking in Persons Secretariat, Mrs.Chenee Russel-Robinson. Mrs. Robinson, welcome to the program. So good to have you.
Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Great. Let us start with the definition. What exactly is human trafficking? You know, we hear it and we say, boy, that is far-fetched, that is moving stuff. Tell us exactly what is trafficking in persons.
Firstly, human trafficking is defined by our local legislation, which is the Trafficking in Persons Prevention, Suppression and Punishment Act of 2007. Section 4 of the Act states that trafficking in person is the receipt, harboring, transportation of a person through various means of threat, use of force, fraud, or other deceptive means, or even abduction for the exploitation of that person. So in a nutshell, what it is, it's the exploitation of persons for another person's benefit.
Right.
Basically, that's what human trafficking is.
Right. And this is usually against the person's will, right?
Right. Against the consent of the person.
So who's most at risk?
So most at risk is our children. So
Our children.
Our boys, yes. Our boys and our young girls are mostly at risk for human trafficking. And women, because the Palermo Protocol, which is the United Nations protocol to suppress trafficking in persons, is known as to suppress trafficking in persons, especially women and children. So basically, children and women are mostly at risk, but males are also at risk.
Yes. Okay, so but Jamaica has been making some strides, right, in this area. Tell us about how well are we doing? Where are we in terms of the ranking?
Right. So Jamaica has been making strides. We are at tier 2 based on the annual United States State Department Trafficking Persons report. They have 3 tiers, which is tier 1, tier 2 watch list, and tier 3. So it's really 4. So we're currently at tier 2, and we have been at tier 2 for the past 5 years. We're striving to achieve a tier 1, but there's still some things that needs to be done. But currently we are doing our best. However, we can improve upon what we have been doing. For example, we have been looking at the laws. We are making changes to the laws even as we speak to amend it so that the penalties are even more stringent to deter traffickers from
All right, so we're at tier 2. How long have we been there, and were we at any other level before?
Yes, so we are at tier 2 since 2016.
Right,
and we were at tier 2 watch list prior to 2016.
All right, can you give me some data?
Watch list is just below tier 2, and I think we were even at tier 3 at one point in time, which is a long time ago.
Right. How do we get to the tier 1 or 2 or 3? What numbers do we have to have? And tell us a little bit about the data as it relates to our situation.
Okay, so tier 1 is the highest you can get to on that level, and that's the next tier that we're striving to achieve. So we're just below tier 1, which is tier 2. How do you get to tier 1? You have to be in full compliance in terms of preventing trafficking in persons, prosecuting trafficking in persons, and protecting victims of trafficking in persons within your nation's borders. So there are certain requirements that you have to meet and certain minimum standards that the country on a whole have to meet. So for example, even our laws, just by looking at our laws need to meet a certain threshold. So when assessed, they see that there are some gaps. So for example, it has been said that some of our laws are not stringent enough, and so that is the reason why we're even amending the law as we speak. So for example, we are removing the options of a person to be fined alone when convicted of trafficking in persons. Because if convicted of trafficking in persons, as it stands, the law says you can be sentenced to an imprisonment and or fine. So which means you can be fined alone. So we are now amending it to say you can be sentenced to imprisonment or imprisonment and fine.
Right.
So there are certain things that we have to meet, such as that. Although, for example, there are other aspects of it in terms of protection of victims to ensure that all their rights and their needs are met in terms of, for example, accommodation. If is it that they require such, we have to provide counseling, repatriation services if they are non-nationals, and things like those. There are a whole gamut of things that we need to meet in terms of to effectively reach another tier. And for example, we're even looking at another shelter to accommodate victims, because we currently have one shelter, but it can only accommodate female victims. So we are looking at a second shelter to accommodate male victims.
Right.
So as soon as we get those things off, I think we will successfully reach that tier.
Right. So are we seeing much of this crime here in Jamaica?
Yes, I will say yes. For example, based on the statistics, we have to date rescued since 2010, which is just over 10 years. We have rescued over 110 victims of trafficking. So meaning annually there are 10 victims rescued from trafficking in persons. And these 10 victims represent a tip of the iceberg, because trafficking in persons is a very clandestine activity. It's a very hidden activity. It's not something that you just go out and readily identify. Right. So this is what we call underground activity. So if we are rescuing 10 victims for the year, meaning that there perhaps be 10 times that more who needs rescuing. So we know that it is happening. We currently have a few matters before the court, and I know that the police are actually investigating additional matters other than the ones that are before the court, so that they can be brought before the court.
So can you give us a profile of the victims? Are they mostly women? Are they mostly men? Are they mostly children in recent times?
Right. So in recent times, most of our victims are children, unfortunately. So they are persons below the age of 18 years old. They are mostly females, which means girls. And most forms of trafficking we are seeing is sexual trafficking or sexual exploitation. However, in recent times as well, males have been increasing. However, it's not at the same rate as the female, but we have seen an increase prior, as opposed to prior years. So I think the ratio as it stands now is possible 6 to 4 out of 10.
Right.
For a female.
Yes. What do you do when you have rescued a victim from this circumstance? What do you do? The person goes back home. Tell us the process, about the process.
All right. So when we rescue a victim, by law, there are certain things that we are mandated to do as a government and as the National Task Force Against Trafficking in Persons, and more so the Ministry of National Security, who chairs the National Task Force Against Trafficking in Persons. We have to coordinate the services, what we call protection services for this victim. So if a victim is rescued, we have to provide accommodation, if is it that the person needs accommodation, because based on the nature of the case, and sometimes they cannot go back home based on reasons. And so we provide them with accommodation, and this is why the shelter is very, very important. We also provide them with counseling services, because as you would imagine, they would have gone through a traumatic experience. Yes. And so we employ the services of the Victim Services Division under the Ministry of Justice to employ counseling. And if it involves a child, we also have to engage a Child Protection and Family Services Agency to also step in and provide counseling and sometimes accommodation for that child. We also provide medical assistance, and this is why we also employ a multi-agency approach on the National Task Force.
Right. So I was going to ask you about right. So tell me about you're now working on a 2018-2021 program. Tell me, how is that going to combat the whole trafficking in persons? How is that going, and what are some of the agencies that are included in that work?
Okay, so our current plan of action is, as you said, 2018 to 2021. So it comes to a close at the end of this year.
Yes.
And it is going fairly well, as some of the things that we would have outlined within the plan of action is for example, to amend the laws, which we have gotten the approval of cabinet, so it's just now for drafting instructions to be made. We have also implemented or anti-trafficking persons clubs within schools. So we have approximately 20 schools across the island who have engaged in this activity, who have executed plans within their schools and activities across their schools. So, for example, we have My Freedom Day. We also have World Trafficking Persons Day not celebrated,
Observe.
commemorated. Right, commemorated or observed within these schools.
Yes.
And so we have been doing fairly well in terms of executing the plan of action, but we have been hampered by the COVID-19 pandemic.
Okay, all right. We're going to talk about that. What is happening with you now as we go through this pandemic? So we're going to talk about that when we come back. We take a break now and we'll be right back.
Human trafficking is modern slavery. It has many forms and faces. Men, women, and children of all ages, race, and class can become prey. They are exploited through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. They are controlled by another person, treated as property, and stripped of their rights. Human trafficking is modern slavery. Let's put an end to it.
Welcome back to Get the Facts. We're talking with Mrs. Chenee Russel-Robinson, who's manager of the Trafficking in Persons Secretariat. And we pick up the conversation now with how the task force has been doing in the whole era of the COVID-19 pandemic.
So, like many others, we have been affected by the pandemic in terms of going out on the ground, because we follow the 3 Ps. And the 3 Ps in trafficking in persons is prevention, protection, and prosecution.
Yes.
And we consider the first P, which is prevention, to be the most important. Because, as we say in Jamaica, prevention is better than cure. And so a part of our prevention efforts is to go out and sensitize, educate the public on what exactly is trafficking in persons and how they can protect themselves from traffickers. And so in previous years, prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, we would have been going physically to spaces such as, we are doing outside broadcast, we do community engagement. So we actually go underground. We have talks with community members, churches, and those places. We hand out flyers and brochures, and we also have town hall meetings and those sessions. However, due to the pandemic, we now have to engage the internet or online platforms to conduct those sessions, which we know technology has its pros and cons.
Yes.
And so sometimes we don't get the reach as we would like because, not everyone has access to certain platforms or even just to the internet. But nonetheless, we have been doing webinars on trafficking in persons in our schools and even in our churches or any group that would have invited us into their space. We continue to do those. So that is how we have been doing our prevention works.
What are some of the signs that we should look out for someone who is being trafficked?
Some of the signs that persons can look out for or red flags are, one, if when you see a person, the person cannot communicate for him or herself, and you know that the person is of their right mind and they are able to properly communicate on their behalf. However, a third party always insists on communicating for that person. This can be a means of control where the trafficker will insist on communicating on that person's behalf. So, for example, we've had a case where a victim turned up at a medical center and the victim was accompanied by the trafficker. However, in the doctor's office, the trafficker always insisted on speaking to the doctor, and the doctor kindly asked the trafficker, to step out, and so that they could properly communicate with the victim, because he knew that the victim could have communicated for herself, but the person always insisted. Yeah. So that is a red flag that persons can look out for, as well as if the person has untreated wounds. That is possible a sign of trauma, and traffickers do not normally give proper medical care. Additionally, if the person is not in control of their finances, normally the trafficker as well control the finances of the person, so they do not have access to their own money. And we also can say if they don't have access to their identification documents, because that is one thing that the trafficker mostly does, is take away the identification document from the victim, because this is also used as a means of control, so the person cannot freely move. As well as if it's a child and the child is not in school, so you are in a community and you know that a child resides at a certain residence, however, you never see that child going to school. This can also be a red flag as well.
Yes. If I witness these signs, what shall I do? For example, what does a doctor do? What does a neighbor do?
So if you witness things like these, the first thing you should do is to call the police. And the police is the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Vice Squad, commonly known as the ATIP Vice Squad within the Jamaica Constabulary Force. And you can call 119 and report the matter. However, you can call their direct line at 967-1359, and you will talk directly to an officer within the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Vice Squad, as they are tasked with investigating all suspected cases of trafficking in persons. So the doctor would similarly call the police and they will step in and investigate the matter.
You know how it is in Jamaica, people are afraid to give this kind of information. Well, what will you say to persons who would really want to go but they're afraid?
Right. Okay, so if you're afraid, you can also call Crime Stop and report anonymously. So you can just call Crime Stop at 311 and give them the information. They will not call you back because they cannot call you back because they do not have your information. So you can also report anonymously at Crime Stop, as well as you can report at the Child Protection and Family Services Agency, CPFSA, because I know some persons feel more comfortable in speaking to certain officers. So they can speak to a child care officer at CPFSA and report matters. As well as I would say that over the years, our trend has been, we have not have such cases where persons' lives have been put at risk, who we have gotten tips from, because we are very confidential and we hold ourselves to the highest regard. And even if persons do not want to report any of those agencies prior mentioned, they can call the Ministry of National Security, which is our office, and they can make the report as well, and we will do the referral to the police.
Right. Okay. Earlier you spoke about giving some kind of support to the victim. How long is this process, and how do you get the person back into his normal neighborhood, his normal how they normally function before?
Okay, so it's normally up to a year, but it's not strictly up to a year, because as we know that the cases sometimes take more than a year. And so if that case is brought before the court, we have to look out for that victim and provide the necessary counseling services for the victim as long as the case continues. And even after the case has finished, we continue to provide services to that victim if the need arises.
So this trafficking in persons, human trafficking, is a real issue. What do you have to tell our audience before we wrap?
So I want to say that one victim is one victim too many, and we must be our brother's keepers, because we are all on this island and no man is an island. And if I have a child, I would like somebody to look out for that child, or if I have siblings, I would like somebody to look out for that sibling. And so we have to look out for our neighbors, for our colleagues at work, for just the man on the road, to see if we suspect something, do something about it. Because as our tagline says, be wise, open your eyes, spot them, stop them, and report them. That is one of the things that we have been grappling with, especially in human trafficking. The cases are really underreported. And if they're not reported, we cannot investigate the case and we will not catch the trafficker. So just exercise caution and due diligence, even when applying for a job. or just meeting someone, please exercise caution.
Thank you so very much. And there's so much more that we need to explore, but this is where the conversation must end for today. I'm sure we'll come back to you for some more time. Yes? And for more information on what the government is doing to combat human trafficking, please visit the website of the Ministry of National Security at mns.gov.jm or call them at 906-4908-221. You may also email them at natfatip@mns.gov.jm. Until next time, when Get the Facts brings you, as always, more important and useful information, I'm your host, Enthros Campbell. Thanks for watching and take good care. Thank you so very much for being with us today.